like Carla, who is a front line of defense, being able to determine what these pest species are and how to address them. You all too have our eyes and ears of our ability to spot some of these things. And if you do, at least, if there's some sort of new pest problem or things like that, getting that information out is an important thing. Our extension system and service is a great way to track and monitor some of these pest species. I deputize my students to be able to try to identify these things. And you can't identify all things, but as eyes and ears, you can, as master gardeners, you can provide at least some knowledge about what species are coming and where they're coming from, reporting that. With when we didn't have fire ant in Montgomery County, one time we had somebody that brought turf to the Austin Peay campus, and they brought it from South Tennessee, and it spread so when I had that, I called my colleague, Steve Powell, who was the state entomologist at the time, now at Cindy Bilbrey, and they reported it, and then we did control measures, West Powell did, and we pushed that infestation back to slow the spread. Now it's here, so we're going to have to deal with that. Unfortunately.
I specifically looked up and
yeah.
Really not.
Yeah.
And then I've been doing
yeah. Yeah, if you take sod from a different place, many times you're going to carry a colony, or you're taking a root ball. The chances are you're going to get some things that are going to move from those places. And McMinnville isn't an active zone of infestation. North of us in Kentucky, they have not reached that yet. So you can't now export sod without having it inspected before it goes to Kentucky, or nursery crops or things like that. Quarantines are useful, at least a regulatory way to reduce the spread or slow the spread of these pests. So, all right, so mealybugs. So we got a bunch about mealybugs. Let's see if I can move on to the next one here. Will that work? Yes, it will. So there's some more mealybugs causing damage. There's different species of them. Probably going to kind of move along. The caterpillars, Lepidoptera. There's a whole series of these creatures that will feed on a lot of different things. This is a beautiful moth species. They've got 4 wings covering them with scales. This is the larva of that, though. It's got some really pronounced spines on it. Sometimes they'll produce a chemical. It's called an urticaceous chemical. That's an irritant to protect themselves from birds. We talked to somebody who had a saddleback that kind of burned and squirts them. You have to be careful with. You see caterpillars like that, it's good not to immediately handle them because they may have some irritation to protect themselves. So the butterflies and moths also, the adults don't chew and feed. They just have this drinking tube. Basically, at rest, it coils up. When they want to use their muscles, they can put that into the tube of the plant and drink the nectar out of it. And so that's the classic thing of the adults. There's the eggs. So very hungry caterpillars feeding on various leaves, chewing them up. There's the largest version. They will pupate and eventually be this beautiful moth that has these eye spots that make birds think it's some kind of mammal. Like they'll flash that up and say, and basically the birds will leave it alone at least enough for it to get away. So interesting defensive protections. I've got some of those eye spots in here on several of these moths that are from Tennessee. The Luna moths and others have it. It's just enough for a bird to say, I jump back. I'm not going to go for that. Now, question about the bagworm. Do we finally get to this? So this is a really intense infestation into, I guess that's Leland cypress or something like that. Arborvitae, okay. Arborvitae, okay. Yeah, here's a spruce tree that was heavily infected with bagworm. This is a moth caterpillar that feeds on these things and spins a cocoon, very intense web that has parts of the plants on it in a conical structure like this. So you can see this is off of, I think that's a cedar. And so it's taken a bunch of the pieces and basically there's a larva, use that and when it's spun its cocoon to kind of make it a little camouflage, et cetera. And then eventually it will pupate and come out. The adult, this is the adult moth. The caterpillar itself is feeding on many different parts of that plant. There's the adult kind of emerging from its pupal case. And it feeds on a lot of different trees. So there's a bald cypress. I think that's what that is. That's a tree that's heavily infested. I think that's a leafing cypress. Lots and lots of little bagworm cases on it. Sometimes they can really cause trouble. Sometimes there's just a few of them on there, just depending. But it's a really intensely spun thing. They've cut that open, and that is not easy. I've tried to take it open. It's a very strong silken case they make. There's the larva. So it doesn't look much like the adult, but it's going to devour those scale-like structures of those trees, and then pack it onto that surface. So let's see, the eggs overwinter inside the body. In this case, the larvae emerge in mid-May and feed up until August. And so then they're going to do a whole host of different kinds of damage, depending. That was some severe damage. I don't ever see that kind of damage, but you'll see patches of it here, depending. And it's unsightly if you've got this, nicely landscaped yard, you're going to run into some of those problems. There's the larva again. Sometimes we see these tent caterpillars. There's the wild cherry trees, apples, crab apples, etc. There's the adult and there's the larva of this. And so they will do, the female will lay some eggs. They will develop into this tent-like structure, and you'll see the little caterpillars that are kind of emerging, chewing, spinning silk in kind of this group conglomerate, devouring all the leaves in those sections. And so let's see. And so, there's a pretty pronounced infestation of those. And eventually they will drop off and pupate and then turn into moths. Okay, so that's the caterpillars. I realize we are kind of running close on time. So the Hymenoptera are many times not so much pest species. They can be pestiferous if they sting us or things like that. But a lot of times they're doing some very important work in pollinating or predation on different pest species and things like that. Generally speaking, we have a lot of beneficials with that. The larvae kind of look grub-like with these. Let's see. The wings themselves are connected with these little hooks. So they call it Hymenoptera. Those wings are the god of marriage, and the little hooks, the wings are married. Married wings is how we learned that. These critters have got, generally speaking, a pedicel, which is a narrowed waist, I guess, as they say about with that. Sometimes you get things that get way out of proportion. Like during the pandemic, there was this Asian hornet, large Asian hornet that was discovered off of Vancouver area near Northwest Washington. And of course, they called it murder hornets. But these are murderous in the way that they will attack honeybees. They love to eat honeybees and other bees. They're not out to eat us, although they could sting us if we get in the way. They're pretty ferocious, but fortunately, they have not spread as they had feared. So we have not had a major invasion of the United States of that, but they're doing a whole bunch of things to try to control those up there. Other species, though, can sometimes cause plant damage. There's sawflies like this one. It is actually it's a type of wasp. They call this a slug, even though it's the kind of caterpillar, if you will, of this sawfly. And so they can do some significant damage to some of the leaves and things like that. Let's see, kind of during the summertime damage. Okay, this is a big jump. I mentioned the spider mite. So insects are part of the insecta group, but these are part of the arachnids. These are really, really little tiny creatures that will feed on plants. So there's spruce mites, two-spotted spider mite, southern red mite. They basically have these mouth parts that are going to feed on the plant cells, suck a lot of the juice, and kind of leave behind the dead and dying parts of that plant. silvering some of the leaves, like, this was a green leaf and it was, scraped and fed on in abundance until, mostly it's all finished up. Spider mites are, can become a problem. Again, not an insect, so there's different control measures for these. More closely related to ticks and spiders. Again, they're feeding on emptying the contents of plant cells with an oval-shaped body. Very, very small though, little specks is what we're going to see with our naked eye. If you get a loop, you can see them in more detail. Sometimes we get outbreaks of these when it gets kind of hot and dry on some of the leaves. One egg to an adult in the hot summer can go in 1 week. So that's a fast reproductive cycle. Therefore, sometimes we get explosions, of populations on these plants. Let's see. So, the egg to larva, you don't have to know, but basically this is a cycle of molts that they go through, and they can cause trouble. There's a spruce mite feeding on various evergreen trees. They're causing a bunch of various kinds of issues, fading foliage, color stippling, and things like that. And that's some significant damage on a scale if they can explode in population like that. They can be active in spring and fall too. So this species, spruce mite, feeds on a tree on spruces, which are more cooler species, and so you run into some problems then. What are the typical controls for mites that are now legal? There used to be some toxic things. Well, mostly it has a repellency factor to it. They just don't, it's just a nasty, plant repellent more than the other things. Now, if they chew on a lot of that, it's not going to be good for them either. But the sucking mouth part insects aren't as much affected by it. So like if you've got like squash bugs that feed on that, they don't, you can spray them and they might not like it, but they'll be back and destroy your squash plants. is what I found. Systemics are the way to sometimes control those, although at a cost. So there's the overwinters an egg on the host, and so you can run into problems like that. Two-spotted spider mite, that's one I'm rather familiar with, causing this kind of this real yellowing, scratching of the surface, destroying those cells and sucking the contents up. In hot weather, they can reproduce rapidly. In cooler weather, it takes a lot longer. So usually it's a hot summer pest that you run into with a spotted spider mite. And they call them spider mites because they spin a silk. You have a bunch of those little crawlers all over there. All right. Good thing is we have beneficials. I don't have enough time to really talk about that, but some of them include a midge that will attack aphids. This is a little fly larva that will attack it. There's the adult fly larva will feed on aphids, particularly small aphids, damage them. We have a whole host of critters that are beneficials. Let's see. Others include the Braconid wasp. This little tiny wasp will lay its egg in a tomato hornworm, and the egg itself goes through this process of twinning and twinning and twinning again. So multiple eggs hatch out from one egg that's laid. And as it does, those little larvae hatch out and feed on the fatty tissues of the inside of the insect, just like Alien, the movie. They used parasitoids as their model for Alien. Fortunately, it doesn't happen to us, but it does happen to them. And so the larvae feed on the inside, then emerge and spin cocoons, and then all those are going to be little wasps. They go out and attack other worms. So the beauty of these are, if you can keep the ones that have these cocoons on, they're going to go out and damage these other caterpillars that may be feeding on your plants. Unfortunately, it's hard to see that caterpillar because it's it blends in so well with the tomato vine. Oh, you can. If you got black light, you can go see some of those. Go out in your tomato plants at night and see them glowing and all that stuff. That's good. That's good. Yeah. But anyway, these are beneficials, and there's a whole host of wasp species that parasitize insects. It's just like if you have an insect, there's probably a parasitoid that attacks it one way or another. Let's see. Aphids. This is an aphelinon wasp that is basically she's laying her egg inside this poor hapless little aphid. The egg's going to hatch, feed on the inside, and turn it into a dead mummy. Here's what the mummy looks like. The adult grows inside, feeds on it, emerges, and goes and does it again. I got a bunch of those on some of these corn plants that they're just the leftover hapless bodies of the mummied aphids. So we're fortunate to have these things, even though we may not recognize them because they're so small. Let's see. Yeah, so there's one that's emerging from one right there. You know, bizarre creatures. We also happen to have a series of predator bugs that are beneficial. This is called a damsel bug. I have a great picture of it. That is like a corn earworm that it's feeding on. True bug predator, basically it sticks its proboscis in and feeds on all the fatty stuff on the other side. It's a gruesome, bizarre death for the insect, but it kills a pest. It kills a pest species, so they're beneficial in that regard. Let's see others. So you can collect them from alfalfa. This is a ground beetle. She showed another picture that was a blister beetle, but this is a ground beetle. They are really good predators of slugs and snails and cutworms and cabbage maggots, all kinds of critters. They prowl around the ground and feed on anything that they can, chew on. Some of them are really voracious. And so the larvae also are, because that's all they do is feed on. So that's one feeding on a poor hapless slug, in that case. And they can eat 50 caterpillars. They just mow them down. So ground beetles are beneficials. Let's see what else. Lacewings. This is a beautiful little, kids call these sort of flying fairy wing things because they're beautiful little green things that fly around. But they're also voracious predators. In their immature stages, that's an aphid with this, is in the jaws of one of those. And then the adults will also feed on it. So all kinds of things: aphids, caterpillars, mealybugs, scales. If you've got some of these natural enemies, many times you can probably let some of the pest populations go to a degree. They can, if they're allowed to take out some of these species, you have some natural control. But if you go spray with very strong, non-selective pesticides, you can take those out, not have them to protect your species. There are also a series of plants that are used to attract some of these, like Angelica, Coreopsis, Cosmos, and others. There's a whole growing literature about what attracts some of these beneficial insects to it. And then we know the lady beetles, obviously very important. They feed on a whole host of critters. There's the aphid alligator, I guess to call it. Angelica, Coreopsis, dill, fennel, yarrow. Those are all attractants to lady beetles because sometimes they need to have a series of plants to feed on before they're going to be able to get to some of the other species. So diversity in ecosystems can sometimes be very beneficial, if you're using species that are going to be attractive. Let's see. There's some other lady beetles. That's one feeding on cottony cushion scale. This is one called the minute pirate bug, and it is a tiny bug that packs a wallet. They're eating machines. They just go in and attack caterpillars, eggs, all kinds of little immatures, sucking the juice out of them. And they can also, though, tag you with a little pinprick type of feel. I've been bitten by them before, but when I mishandled one. But mostly they're not out to get you or anything like that. They're out to feed on these insects. And goldenrods, they love goldenrods. Time of year for that, along with soldier beetles and stuff like that. Beneficial insects that are helping. Daisies and things like that. There's a soldier beetles. I had a question about that earlier. This is a beetle that's cousin to the lightning bugs, but they are really good at feeding on aphids and caterpillars and other insects, particularly when they're small enough to feed on. Looks like I've got some other end of recording thing that's happened. Hate to say it. Yeah, probably the internet. But at least we can show this. So they're attracted to various different things, including goldenrod, catnip, etc. This is a spine soldier bug I was talking about. it has these two little spines off the side. That thing this is a destroyed caterpillar that was feeding on a crop. So there's a bunch of beneficials out there, including tachinid flies, and they burrow in there, kill them from the inside. They lay their eggs on it, and then the larvae of those wade in and start feeding on. There's the female laying her egg, and they will, attack. These are the little tiny larvae that are feeding on these leaf feeders. Many times they don't have to be big; they just have to get to them and start feeding on them. And you can spread those with various different kinds of wildflowers and things like that. Okay, syrphid flies. I guess we're almost at the very end here. This is the hoverfly that you may have think sometimes called sweat bee that flies around. The larvae of these love to feed on aphids as well. They are, again, what is that great English word for fly larva? Maggot. That's a maggot, technically, but they're just basically eating machines. They're going to go devour a bunch of aphids as beneficials. There's the syrphid hoverfly. That's the adult. We also get hunting wasps. I was talking a little bit about that at the break. That will feed on a variety of different caterpillars and things like that. Some, like this is a pumpillid wasp feeding on spiders. Others are going to feed on a variety of caterpillars and take them back. Red wasps, or those sting wasps, they love caterpillars and they like to feed them to their offspring. So I did get through before 9 o'clock. Sorry, it's been, but this is just to give you a coverage of a bunch of different things. Insects, there's the good, the bad, the ugly. We get lots of problems. We also have some beneficials that are part of that process. I think that she has got some websites here that Tennessee has listed, the Plant Pest Center, et cetera. These are some beautiful plant-sucking bugs that look like thorns. They're ones that are feeding on. There's the immature of that. But to help, there's some basic information to look at damage and other things like that for further reference. And you all are going to get this slide set, I guess, that they've got, and some other materials, I think.
Yeah. And we got the
all right, so finally got through everything here today. Yeah, if you'd like, you can get a look at some of these specimens up here. I think some of them already got a chance. Yeah, there's a good question. There's a question about of insectaries, the ethics of buying certain things. Some companies will sell lady beetles. A lot of times they're not raising them on bugs. They're just going up to the mountains in California and harvesting them in great numbers. I don't know that all of them are that way, but there's a question of that. Sometimes folks that sell praying mantis egg cases are not necessarily ethical from an insectary point of view because they're just feeding on a lot of insects. They can eat bees and things like that too. But there are a series of insectaries in different parts of the country that will provide things that will attack whiteflies, mealybugs, stuff like that you can order, or nematodes and things like that. There's a series of professional standards by certain insectaries that use beneficial species. But I don't think that buying lady beetles is a good idea, partially because when you do, they disperse. If you have them in a big bag, you release them, they have a dispersant thing and they're going to fly away. Sometimes people will dip them in something like Sprite to keep their wings together so they have to stick and walk around and dry them out. That's what somebody said they did, but I don't recommend it. Mostly, I don't recommend buying lady beetles from catalogs because it is a mining process and it's not what we consider ethical. Mostly, if you provide some of these wildflowers, they're going to attract them. Giving them a diversity of habitat capabilities gives you a diversity of natural enemies that can control the species. Yeah, this is the time of year when you get a bunch of these beneficials as well as the pest species. Okay, there's some more.
Okay, this is under the dinosaur.
Oh, yes. This is underneath the scope. So these are mummified aphids that I was showing you before, and you can come see them up and a little bit closer. Basically, these were, and there's some that are just the left grass skins to aphids, ladybees. So we have a bunch, like, at a certain time, most of the aphids this is one that's probably still alive, but this population's been decimated by parasitoids and ladybeetles. Things like that. Yeah, and there's a bunch of other things. Let's see, that one. May see more fungi on this one than any.
Yeah, I think we've got some scorch and some fungi. I mean, it almost looks like spider mites, but I don't.
This
Don't
one may
really
have some
see it.
spider mites on it. Not sure. That's one I got from the
Mhm.
campus. Hawthorne tree. It's in New England.
Mhm. The excrement's there.
Leftover excrement, yeah.
The
sometimes
excrement is there.
See a lot of that.
So they have been there.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
just trying to figure out. Okay, look how quickly this mold has
Wow.
formed since he brought this sample
Yeah,
in.
they got really nice and
It
moist.
was green and
Is that
then.
powdery? We get some fungi and other things. We're going to talk about plant diseases in November,
All right.
about plant pathology.
It does look like powdery mildew. Wow.
Ants are cousins to the bees and wasps, so they're Hymenoptera, but they just are wingless. Most ants aren't going to be a big issue because they're just part of the environment. Now, if it's fire ants, you may want to take them out. There's a series of things. You know, there are going to be other ants that will eventually come in and replace them. Mostly, they're not so much pests of the plants. Sometimes they get to be a problem when they're coming in houses. It just depends. I mean, sometimes they're controlling other insects. They a lot of times will take insects and feed their young ones. Yeah, things like that. Yeah, but caterpillars too. Yeah. Yes, yes. Someone was really a Belgian. Yeah. They got parasite. I think there's a parasitoid. It's taking time. I mean, it's just like the lions and wildebeest in the valley. You've got a few lions and a lot of wildebeest. There's going to be a bunch of, and with this case, it's invasive wildebeest that